Good afternoon, Oakstone. Happy Sabbath to everybody. We're grateful to have everyone here. We're a little thin today. I guess we have some people traveling, some people going to camp, some people working at camps. So we're really glad that they have that opportunity. I think quite a few folks are out at John Snyder's camp, if I'm not mistaken, working out at Soto. So we're happy that John and the Snyders have that opportunity and that those have the opportunity to go serve there. Thank you to the worship team, and welcome to everyone on the stream. We're glad that you can be here with us today, and we hope that today's message will be profitable. I hope that anyway. Maybe y'all hope that too. I don't mean to speak on your behalf, but here we go. So this is Father's Day weekend. Happy Father's Day in advance to all the fathers out there. This is such a, I guess you can give yourselves applause. I don't deserve the round of applause for myself. I'm just like, I'm kind of meh as a father in my own, if I have to give myself a performance evaluation on the job. So I'm not here to offer you fatherly advice. I'm going to look to the Bible for that. Because I'm still young in my fathering career. Maybe not as young as Eric is in his fathering career, but I'm super young in my fathering career. So there's not going to be a lot of advice I give you today, but I think, so this message will be as much for me as it is for everyone else. And you need not be a father to benefit from today's message, I don't think. I hope not, because on one hand, it's going to give us a better understanding of who the Father is, what he desires for us. But two, it's going to, we each have our spheres of influence. And when I talked about mothers on last time I spoke on Mother's Day, or on or about Mother's Day, it was saying, look, you don't have to be a mom for this to be of value, because we have our spheres of influence. We have people that we are able to apply these things to. And frankly, the world needs fathers to step up in a big way. I have some statistics about that. 2021 Census Bureau. So it's a government bureau where they have nothing. In theory, they have no bias, at least towards these metrics. 18.4 million children in the U.S. as of 2021 live in fatherless households. That's 1 in 4 kids. 1 in 4 kids are living in households now without fathers. Now, that might be some of your situations or some of your kids' situations. This is not meant to be a slight to that at all, okay? And don't think that this is speaking your future by listening to these statistics. But for those who are at the homes with no present biological, adoptive, or stepfather, which is 1 in 4 kids again, we see that 90% of arsonists come out of this group. 80% of teen sex offenders come out of this group. You have a 4-time greater risk of growing into poverty. You have a 2-time greater risk if you're a single mom for infant mortality. I'm going to guess that's because the father's supposed to offer support during the pregnancy and moral support and all the other support. I don't know why that is, but that's the association. You have a 7 times more likely chance to become pregnant as a teen. You're twice as likely to drop out of school if your dad's not present. You're twice as likely to try to take your own life. And you're more likely to have behavioral problems and get involved with drugs and alcohol. If this is you, or if this has been you or your situation, again, please don't let this be what you think dictates your life. You don't have to become the statistic, okay? You serve a God and have a Father in heaven who will stand in where your father ought to have. And in fact, God has a very special place in his heart for these sorts. Psalm 68, verse 5, you don't have to turn there, but you can. It says, God is a father of the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy habitation. And God sets the solitary in families. He brings out those who are bound into prosperity, but the rebellious dwell in a dry land. And in Psalm 146, verse 9, it says, Yahweh upholds the widow and the fatherless, but the way of the wicked he brings to ruin. So the wicked and the rebellious, no. God does not have a place for those in his kingdom, but he has a special place in his heart for those who may not have the husband, may not have the father present. There is one who is your true father, who has his eyes on you, who gave you life. And so if you find yourself in this position, understand and please be willing to extend the grace to the fathers who may have failed you in some way, if that's the spot you find yourself in. They are human like we are human. We're all human. We all fall down in different ways and in different areas. So if that is where you find yourself, please don't apply that perception of who your physical father was to who God is, because God is the prototype and the model after whom they ought to have taken, and some have just simply chosen not to. So please don't let that be who you believe God to be. It becomes easy for us to do, to take who we associate closest with a father or father figure and then say, well, the Father in heaven, and now apply that to him. But that's not the way it needs to be. So if that was you, if you've been affected in such a way, and maybe Father's Day is a difficult time of year for you, I don't know. I don't know each and every one of your situations. But if Father's Day is a difficult time of year, I invite you just to extend the grace to your family. Maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your dad. But extend that grace that we would wish to be extended to us, knowing that in this world there will never be a perfect father. So maybe you're a father that's been less than involved in your child's lives. Maybe you've done less than you could. Today is the day that we can choose to turn that around. Or maybe you're a father who's already raised your kids, and you say, I don't know if this message is applicable to me. It is. Again, we have spheres of influence. You have grandchildren. You may have grandchildren. You may have neighbor kids who don't have that. If there's a 1 in 4 chance of kids in the United States not having a dad, you may be their neighbor. You may have the opportunity, with the permission and all appropriate actions, to be able to take a more fatherly role, or at least be the one in their life that they look up to. One of the primary roles that a Bible prescribes to parents, and especially to fathers, is to pass on a sense of morality and to pass on a sense of values and instill them into their kids. So I'm sorry if the message has been a little low up to this point, but I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about now what the roles of fathers ought to be. We've established that the fathering in the United States is not what it ought to be. So let's talk about what it can be, what it should be. And there are other people who are able to deliver this message more effectively, of saying, here's what the model of what a man and a father ought to be, and how we ought to shape ourselves and go after that goal. I think there are people that will deliver that message better than I'm able to. So what I want to focus on today is what God asks us to do as fathers, and then specifically how he acts as a father. Because we can't take from a better role model than from God himself. This is not going to be all-encompassing. The Bible, if you just look up the word father or the father's will or whatever, it's a very long laundry list of things. I can't cover all that today. But I want to take a few pointers and few niche things and kind of draw out of those. So if you'll join me along, let's go to Deuteronomy 6 and verse 4. This is something we're all familiar with. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 4. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. So anywhere we see, again, I think we all know this, but where we see the 4 capital letters, Lord, that's the replacement for Yahweh, and we're just going to use that. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hands, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So let's take a quick break there. How many times can you just have that conversation at the dinner table with your kid? Oh yeah, the number 6 commandment is don't murder, right? Okay, well, what's number 7? Don't steal. No, that's a superficial level of understanding, but and that's good that they need to understand those. But when we get into it, we need to be able to take from what God's word is and put it in a digestible form so that our kids can understand, or your neighbor's kids can understand. To relate them in a lesson, in a way that they can understand the lessons, right? So when it says you should, teach them and talk of them constantly, sitting in your house and walking by the way when you lie down, it's saying, hey, let's relate God's law to everyday life. When you're walking by the way, let's figure out how is it we can make God's God's way be the way that we explain to the kids in terms that they can understand. Maybe it's through creation. Maybe it's through understanding of the infractions that little kids commit against each other. Is a beautiful way to introduce God's law to them, right? Because then they begin to understand what's fair, what isn't fair, and that God's way is always fair and is always looking for fairness and to treat others with love and fairness. Picking back up in verse 20, when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is the meaning of the testimonies, the statutes, and the judgments which Yahweh our God has commanded you? And you'll say to your son, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, and Yahweh brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And Yahweh showed signs and wonders before our eyes, great and severe, against Egypt, Pharaoh, and all his household. Then he brought us out from there, and that he might bring us in to give us the land which he swore to our fathers. And he commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear Yahweh our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive, as is this day. Right? So, in the modern application, this would be like, God, that sin that you just did, that thing you did against your brother, God is able to remove you from that sin. He's able to bring you out of that Egypt. I don't know how old your kids are, but maybe they can understand the concept of analogies and metaphors maybe a little bit better than my little Shiloh can at this age. But she does understand what's fair and what isn't fair. And that, at least at Josiah's age, if God can forgive you for that, there has to be some penalty that he has to take on. And so we do these things to remind, when your son asks, why are we doing these things? Why do we have all these rules, these laws, these things? It's because God was able to deliver us from the slavery these things put us into. God is able to free us from the penalty thereof. Let's go to Psalm 78 and verse 2. This part of the Old Testament, there's even an allusion here as to what happens to a generation who doesn't have the fathers instruct their children to follow God. Maybe recently you just saw Jeopardy had 3 contestants. Now, when you're on Jeopardy, you have a pretty good base level knowledge of culture and all of the different things, right? In Jeopardy, it just happened that they asked the question, our Father who is in heaven, blank, be your name. What's the word? Hallowed. Neither of these 3 people on Jeopardy knew that. These are not intellectual slouches, but these are people who have not been instructed by their fathers. I don't mean this as a slight, but the fact is that they were failed in terms of having a moral sense instilled in them and having the words of the Lord instilled in them. And we see what happens to a generation that this doesn't have this. So Psalm 78 and verse 2. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. So right there we're seeing this is how it's passed along. Our fathers, our mothers have told us these things. We have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of Yahweh and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. For he has established a testimony in Jacob and has appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they might arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. So we see that the generations, the role of the coming generations and how they know God or don't know God, it falls directly to us as parents. In this verse specifically as fathers, I think fathers refers more broadly here to the set of parents, but that it falls to us, of course. It's not going to happen through osmosis. It's not going to happen through once a week at church, at Little Acorns. They might learn how to do crafts at Little Acorns that are, with a Bible theme, but that's kind of the icing on the cake. That's the cherry on top. That's the base work, and I think we all know here, I don't mean to be preaching at you guys because this is preaching to the choir, but it becomes the parents' role, the grandparents' role to pass this along to their kids so there will be a generation to come who might know the Lord. So fathers have a role and a job to undertake while we're here on earth. And it is important to remember as parents that we are just temporary guardians. We're custodians, essentially. We say they're our kids. They are. But they're kids that we are custodians of while we're here. And we're just temporary fathers, temporary mothers, or fathers-to-be or mothers-to-be, or grandparents to be, to God's children, God's creation, the ones he wants raised up. And I just said wants here. The one he wants to be raised up to be a spiritual being in his kingdom and his family one day. And why do I say that? Why do I use that word? Because if we want to understand more about what God is intending for his kids, what he wants for his kids, there is a specific phrase we can look to in the Bible for this. Now, this is a phrase that's used throughout the Bible fairly broadly. But I want to focus on a few verses today that cover this. Specifically, God's will, or the Father's will, or the will of the Father, or the will of God. There are a few verses that speak very directly to what that is and is not. Right? Now, we often will say, if it's God's will, I'll do such and such. Or if it's God's will, I'll be there. But what does that mean? The word will, and just a little bit of background here on the word meanings here. Where we see will in the New Testament, it can mean a couple different things in the Greek. One definition is prothesis. This is like an intention or a plan set ahead, a laying out beforehand. So if God's will that you were to do something from the foundation of time, right? That's God's deliberate determination, essentially the laying out of the blueprint. So God's will was that Christ would come and die for our sins. He laid that out from the foundation of time and saw it come to pass. That's the prothesis will, an intention or a plan. But the word that is used more commonly is thelema. Thelema, that's prescriptive desire. A better way to put that is like a wish. It's his hope. It's his desire. It's his wish. It's his heart's desire. And this usually refers more to like an emotion than to something like an action or an act or of willing something to be. So if God really wills something to be, it's going to happen. That's like prothesis. Thelema is like my deep set desire, my deeply held wish, what I want. So we want to talk about today what God wants when we talk about God's will. If we want to be good fathers, and by extension mothers, we will mimic the Father's will, and we will find what he wants for us, and we will apply this to our children as well. So if we want to be good fathers and mothers, we'll find what God wants for us, and we'll take that because we're like small case G, God's over our family, is the head of the household, fathers and mothers. The kids, they're under our authority, just like as we submit ourselves under authority to God. So we want to model and mimic what God wants for us. We should want the same for our children. All right, so I want to kind of examine it from that perspective, because we will not only be good stewards if we do it this way, but we'll be fully fulfilling our roles as ministers to these kids. So a few verses about what is and what is not the will of God. Let's get started on that. Let's go to Matthew 18 and starting at verse 14. Well, actually, let's back it up a little bit. This is the context here is helpful. But starting in verse 12, Jesus is talking, telling the parables. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? And if he should find it, I say to you assuredly, that he rejoices more over that sheep than over the 99 that did not go astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. It's not God's desire that any of his created ones, any of his little ones that he's created should perish, should be lost, should be not saved and welcomed into his kingdom. Likewise, as fathers and mothers, we desire life for our children. Not just now, in this life. We obviously want to protect them. We want to give them the best quality of life that we have, that we can give them now. We want life for them eternal. God is telling us not to think against these little ones, but to be for them. So when the one goes astray, it's not anger towards that one. Sure, that's the human emotion that might come out, but it's the rejoicing, the gladness to see them return. The letting go of the things that were, the things that have come to pass, the things they might have got themselves in, and the welcoming back, just like the father modeled with the prodigal son. Whenever the one who was prodigal came back, there's much rejoicing. Oh, there's so much rejoicing. And it's because we don't hold that against them when they repent, when they come back. We desire life for them. Life eternal. Quality of life in this life, yes, but life eternal for them. So it is not the will of God, our Father in heaven, that one of these little ones should perish. And likewise, that should not be our will. It should be our desire that they have life. 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 3, moving to the next. 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 3. This speaks directly to what the will of God is. For this is the will of God. What? Your sanctification. That you should abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God. That no one should take advantage of and defraud his brother in this manner, because the Lord is the avenger of all such, and also as we forewarned you and testified. So, as parents, we teach our kids to abstain from sexual immorality as they're growing up, right? This world wants that for them so badly. We're watching right now is forces, political parties, but more importantly, the forces behind these political parties are rallying and trying to push their way into business through diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. We watch as they are trying to pull all of society towards them in order to tell them that this is what you need to do. And you will find your fulfillment not in any one thing, not in any one God, not even in your career anymore. It used to be you could find fulfillment in a career according to the world, right? Now it's you will find your fulfillment through some deviant sexual approach. The will of God is that we teach our kids to be sanctified, to abstain from this. In a world that desires to pull them into this, is saying, no, keep them from that. And not in passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God. In verse 5. In verse 4, it says that we should each know how to possess and rule over, what does it say this specifically? It says to possess his own vessel, his own body, in sanctification and in honor. Basically, it's saying, look, you've been given this body. Some are better than others. Some work better than others. But you've been given this body to use it for the sanctification, the honoring, and the lifting up of God. To bring fruit, to bear fruit. That can be metaphorical, that can be literal. But the fruit you will bear statistically, the statistics we talked about, the fruit you will bear if you're doing it outside of the covenant bonds of marriage is statistically not going to be what God is looking for. Yeah, he can take that. He has a heart for the fatherless. He has a heart for those people. But he wants the family core unit because this is where little ones are made. He designed this so they could thrive in that environment, right? So it's saying not in passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God. And I think this is interesting. And the question, of course, becomes why? What harm is it? What's the problem here with sexual immorality? It's if consenting adults and whatever. That no one should take advantage of and defraud his brother or sister in this manner, because the Lord is the avenger of all such, as we also forewarned you and testified. That's interesting. So it's saying now, it's not just saying don't just do these things because they're wrong. It's telling you why. It's saying, look, this is taking advantage in a way you don't want to take advantage of your brother. And it's so important to me is God to do this, that we will not, I will avenge myself on those who do take advantage of their brethren in this way. And so it's our will and desire for our kids that they remain pure. And that's hard to do in this day and age. I remember when I first held Willa, when she was first born, I remember she was handed to me and I picked her up, and the thought that went through my head immediately like that was like, I'm going to protect this little girl. I'm going to hurt whoever hurts her. Now, I was like, I don't know where that one came from, but actually, I think the word was murder. I was like, I'm going to kill whoever hurts this little girl. But that's the idea that it's not just in a sense of physical hurt, it's whoever the world is out to harm our children. That's a fact. We want to bury our heads in the sand sometimes about that. Oh, schools aren't that bad. Oh, whatever it is, fill in the blank, it's not that bad. Peppa Pig's not that bad. Things are getting infiltrated. I'm sorry to break it to you. Things are absolutely getting infiltrated. We were using Duolingo for Willa the other day. It's got cute little cartoon characters so she can learn her Spanish. It's interactive and she pokes the buttons, and then we learn that there's same-sex couples and that there's this, that, and the other thing that's bringing in all the woke initiatives, trying to push it in at the kids' level. So we had to scramble. Be like, what are we going to find so that we don't break hearts, and yet we can keep her happy and learning and learning in an innocent sense the way it's supposed to be. Kids ought not be having this stuff foisted on them at this age. And so the will of God is that our kids be abstain from sexual immorality, and by extension, I could add that they be protected. So that would be our will for our kids as well, right? To do what we can to protect them, to wrap them up, to train them, to talk with them about it, because if we don't, the world certainly will. Appropriate ages, of course, but the world is now even throwing that out. So I don't know what it's going to look like in our family, but it's likely we're going to have talks that we don't want to have talks before it's time to have those talks. I'm really glad that all the little kids are in there today. That's a blessing. Worked out. I also love that God is the avenger of all such. We are grieved in our hearts, I think, by seeing what society is becoming, what they're pushing down, what they're trying to hand and make our kids accept as normal and push it down. God is the avenger of these things. He will not have little kids have this pushed on them forever. He's a guardian and avenger to these people. Okay, next thing for the will of God in Christ Jesus in us. 1 Thessalonians 5, just a few pages over. 1 Thessalonians 5 in 18. We're going to start in the latter half of verse 18, and then we're going to jump around within here just a little bit. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. You'll say, what? What's the will of God in Christ Jesus for me? Because it's actually finishing a thought. So we need to go back up to verse 14 to kind of pick up where that is. Verse 14. 1 Thessalonians. Did I say Timothy? It's Thessalonians we're in. I hope I said Thessalonians, because my Bible says Timothy, but this says Thessalonians. We're in Thessalonians, y'all. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 14. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak, be patient with all. See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good, both for yourselves and for all. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and in everything give thanks. I could essentially model my parenthood, if you want to call it, I guess, parenthood. The lessons I want to teach my kids are almost all summarized within this, right? This covers a laundry list of things when we see misbehavior. This covers almost that laundry list of things we see. Warn those who are unruly. If your kids are unruly, give them the warning. That's we're not going to put up with that. We can't have unruliness. God doesn't want it in his children. We can't have it in our own. Comfort the faint-hearted. Some kids are a little bit more timid, a little bit more faint-hearted, or I'm not really sure what faint-hearted means. I looked it up today, and it didn't really help. The definition didn't really help. I think timid's probably a fair one. But some kids are more timid. It says comfort them. Uphold the weak. Within every order of, you see it in chickens. You see it. It's not a sermon if I don't bring up chickens somehow, right? Because we raise chickens. So, but you see it in chickens. You see it in nature. You see it in order. You see it in kids, where you have the weak one who typically will get picked on by others. God doesn't have any of that. He says, uphold the weak. Be patient with all. If I could be patient with all, and if I could get my kids to be patient with all, we would be cooking with gas. We would be absolutely killing it. So That's a whole sermon in and of itself, and it is to be patient with all. But that see that no one renders evil for evil to anyone. No revenge, kids. We're not gonna get vengeance on each other. But always pursue what is good, both for yourself and for all. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Rejoice always. That's a hard one to instill in little kids, to teach them that, stuff doesn't come, money doesn't come from trees, stuff doesn't come from trees. But that whether it does or doesn't, we rejoice always. And that's a tough one as an adult. To rejoice in all things, because God is working out a purpose, He's working out a weight of salvation in us, and that merits rejoicing when we recall what it is He's doing for us. Verse 17, pray without ceasing. I sometimes have a problem getting my little kids to pray. I can either pray for them, I can pray with them, I get them to repeat, stuff where I say, so they're kind of learning to pray. But the thing I'm trying to explain to them, and the thing I'm trying to do in my own life, and I'm sure so many of you guys do this too, but is when I wake up, I'm talking to God. What do you want from me today? What can I do? How can I serve you? Blessed be your name because you give me another day of life. And may I get through this day without bringing shame to the family name. May I get through this day with grace and patience for all. Pray without ceasing. That's a difficult thing if we take prayer to be a formal, on your knees, on your bed, in the secret place thing. That's not practical. But to pray without ceasing, to get our kids in that mode where they're afraid about something. Oh, let's pray about it. You can pray to God anytime you want if you're afraid. And to teach the kids around us. It doesn't have to be your own kids. Again, I know we have a lot of parents here who with little kids, and many who are traveling, not here today, but this can be the kids that are in your sphere. Man, if you can teach them to pray without ceasing, what a blessing that would be to kids that you know, your grandkids, your neighbor kids. You're not even necessarily praying for them. That may cause friction with the parents, I don't know. But if you can teach them to pray without ceasing, well, then that's between them and God. And in everything, give thanks. Everything, give thanks. That's a hard one when you're a little kid. You can be really grateful, but in the next second, you can be just crying your eyes out because the thing you're grateful for snapped in half because you left it on the floor and someone stepped on it, right? But we have problems with that as adults too. But we get our kids to rejoice always, to be praying without ceasing, and everything give thanks. Because this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you, and for you, and for you, and for me. And so it's also His will for our kids. It's the will He has for our kids as well. 1 Peter 2:13, going on to the next one. What else is the will of God? Both for us and for our kids. 1 Peter 2 and verse 13. Therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it's to the king as supreme, or by governors, or to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as slaves of God, or bondservants of God. The will of God is that by doing good we may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. This is essentially, and prior to that, the submitting to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. This is training our kids to be good citizens, essentially. Where man's law does not conflict with God's law, this is training our kids to have a heart of submission to those who God puts in authority, not one of rebellion. We see what's going on with this has probably happened in every generation in some form, but I think now with, with the lack of God being taught in schools since the 60s being removed from schools, it's actually really interesting. You can see from the time that in the 60s when they removed the commandments, I can't remember the exact statistic. I wish I had it with me. But like the next year, I think it was either the same year or the next year, college standardized tests just tanked. Now, that's an interesting, is it causal? I don't know, but it's correlated. You can also see in the 60s when the God was removed from the schools, you can see that marriage absolutely tanked. I'm assuming that no-fault divorce probably began to be more of a thing at that time. But I did the math today. I can't remember the exact numbers. I wanted to say it was annually, as in whatever the numbers you started with in the 60s, come to the 2000s, and now it's a 21-time increase. Actually, it was almost 22 times the increased number of divorces. We train our kids to be good citizens, not to be rebellious. I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent. I was bringing up all the stuff about divorce because now we see what happens. We have fatherless homes. We see the increase in crime. We see the increase in not teaching our kids godly ways. And as a result, we see crime and like the teen mobs skyrocket. So yes, you've had teen crime in every generation, is what I was getting at. Now with YouTube, we see it a lot more, but I think it's also see it a lot more because we have removed God. We've removed the parental family structure. And so you see this going through the roof. You see rebellion against authority. You see people talking to cops and police officers. You see kids talking to them like they should talk to no adult, much less to a police officer, someone who has the power of life and death in his hands for you. And you see this in youth today. God's will is that by doing good, we may put silence the ignorance of foolish men and be submissive to the governors who are sent by God for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. And that he's just asking us basically, make your kids into good citizens, make them productive members of society. And that by doing good, our kids won't contribute to the rot and the downfall. Because society is nothing more. A church is the same. A church is nothing more than a collective of people, and a society is nothing more than a collective of citizens. Right? And so, while it's easy to say the other people, it really comes down, be it the church or be it the society, is what are we each individually doing? Are we honoring God individually? Are we pursuing a spirit of revival individually? Are we serving other gods individually? Are we pursuing things of the flesh? Are we pursuing things of the world? And by extension, are we raising up kids who are doing the same? Or are we going to raise up kids to be good citizens, respectable, those who do good? John 6, verse 38, excuse me. John 6:38. And Jesus is teaching here, and he says that, I have come down from heaven. Why? Not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that of all he has given me, I should lose nothing, but I should raise it up on the last day. And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. This underscores the most critical role of fathers and mothers, was that we lead our kids to Jesus. If we can get our kids to Jesus, Jesus can begin to do his work in their lives so that all that are his and all of his, none will be lost. Because God says that, look, God's will is that all he has given Jesus, he should lose none of it, but he should raise it up at the last day. He's talking about those who are his, those who belong to Jesus. Jesus will do the work in their hearts. Jesus will do the work in their minds in order to see sure and see fit that they are raised up at the last day, that they are resurrected. He will be the captain of their salvation to see them through from the difficulties and the challenges of life, the trials we face, the diversions we come along, when we go off the trail. He's there to work things back, to lead us back, to work out our salvation, to lead us to the Father so that God can raise us up at the last day to everlasting life. The will of him who sent Jesus is that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life. By analogy, and this isn't the case for anyone here, I don't think, but let's just pretend, and I'm not inferring this for my own kids, but let's just pretend we have one kid, the oldest kid, the firstborn, who is a role model. This kid is able to model what it is to be a good member of the household. This child is obedient. This child wants to serve and to please the father and the mother. This child doesn't cause issues, doesn't start fights, isn't selfish. This child isn't prideful. This child is humble. It looks out for the interests of others. This child is willing to help. This child is willing to take the punishments of their younger brothers and sisters so that their younger brothers and sisters don't have to suffer. As the father of that child, if I had such a child, my will would be, I want the other kids to emulate this kid, right? Wouldn't you all? I want my others to do exactly as this child does. And furthermore, while I can train them and I can teach them, I want that child, I want them to follow that child, to be around that child, to look to that child as their example. And I want them to appreciate what that child does for them when they get in trouble and that child steps in their stead instead, in their place. My will as the father of this child is that they see the son or the daughter, the firstborn who this hypothetical firstborn who does everything right, and they follow that kid. Well, yes, absolutely having a relationship with me, but while they have a very deep and meaningful relationship with that sibling. And so it is with Jesus, and so it is with the Father for us. So this underscores the most important role of fathers, that we lead our kids to Jesus. He will do work in their lives. And where we fall short, I think God will help make up the difference when we're seeking Him on that. And sometimes we'll fall short and we'll say, what should we have done differently? What could I have done differently? And things are what they are. But we're able to still lift up the kids in prayer. We're able still to appeal to the Father, appeal to Jesus to work in their lives. And He will have His work. Ephesians 5, verse 14. Therefore, he says, awake, you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. The inference here is that it's all the things in this verse do opposite of those things, right? Not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Do not be drunk with wine, which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your hearts to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things to God the Father, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another in the fear of God. These are the things that the will of the Lord is. We fathers, we mothers, we are to be an example, to live a way of life for children to imitate. And so we can't be conformed to this world, as Romans 12:2 says, but we have to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, that we may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. If we were to apply this application of the will of God, it's teaching our kids to stay pure from the world and teaching our kids how to think. Society does not teach our kids how to think. They teach them what to think. They're glad to do that. But they don't teach them how to think. And so when it says here, if we take what God's will is for us, that we prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God, this is not just telling our kids what to think, but how to get there through the mode of thought, right? It used to be that thinking was greatly valued. Throughout history, thinkers have been valued. Thinkers have been looked up to. Now it's, I don't know, influencers? I'm not sure what is it we look up to as a society anymore, right? I sound like such an old man, you guys. Just, have you seen the TikToks and the And the cell phones, I sound like such an old man. It's like, I remember being a kid and listening to the preachers kind of rail about the technology, and I'm like, I would never do that. Anyway, that we would stay pure from the world and teach our kids how to think and to prove what that good and acceptable and perfect will of God is. And the wisdom for that begins in this. Jesus has an example of how we can do that. In John 5, verse 30, he says this. He says, of myself, I can do nothing. That's an interesting statement for Jesus to say, right? The guy who's doing miracles, the guy who's raising people from the dead, the guy who's turning water to wine, the guy who's without sin. But he goes on to explain a little bit more. He said, as I hear, I judge. And my judgment is righteous because I don't seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. Jesus is saying here, he had the will, he had the opportunity, the ability to choose sin if he wanted. He had his own will. But the good news is that he suppressed that will and instead deferred to the Father's will. He could have deferred to the will of the devil when he was tempted. He could have deferred to the will of others, the Pharisees who wanted him to be quiet and not teach. He could have pursued whatever will, I guess, he had. I'm not sure what his own human will would have had him do. But instead, he deferred and submitted not to his, but to the will of the Father who sent him. And so we find that when we do that, we too can be more plugged into what God's will is. When we're listening for what God's voice is, we're listening for what that will is. When we're seeking it out, we're doing a little bit of like what we're doing today, figuring out what is the will of God. And we look through the Bible and we see, we can kind of start to put together the mosaic or the picture through pulling through these verses. What is the will of God? And if we sub that out, will, work, I think you can use those interchangeably. If you desire something, you will work to get it. So God has his work too. If he has his will, he has his work. And we know what the work of God is. Jesus tells us actually in John 6, verse 29. Jesus answered them and said to them, this is the work of God, that you believe in him who he sent. That seems like a really incomplete version, I guess, of what God's work would be, right? If you just look at it like that. But it's not, because what's happening here is the work of God is that you believe him who he sent. He sent Jesus to come die for us, to be there to raise us up on the last day, to see through our salvation, to work on our hearts, to give us a pure heart, to give us a new name, to do all these different things that Jesus works in the works of salvation, the things that we can't do a bit of it ourselves. But and the work of God is that we believe in him who did it. Why? Why is the belief so important? It's because Jesus has to have the belief. Remember that Jesus said that he can't really do much in the towns that didn't have belief for him, didn't believe in him, that didn't have the faith that he could do the work. God asked that we believe in his Son so that Jesus can be enabled to do his work in us. And God wants this work done in us, right? He wants this. This is his will for us, that we would desire deeply. We desire this also for our children. He desires that we would desire this for our children. His work is that we believe in Jesus. And I guess if we desire it, the question is, and if I desire this for my kids, the question we have to ask each of ourselves, and I have to ask myself, is what are we going to do to help our kids to get there, to have a belief, to have a hope in Jesus? In all of our walk, if we're not doing that, if we're not believing in him who he sent, he who the Father sent, Jesus, if we're not training our kids up there, then I would suggest that our religion is maybe not what we think it is. Salvation is a very simple thing. It's not a matter of hashing out all the doctrines and having them perfect and understanding the hidden knowledge of the things that have maybe been put away. All that has its place. But it's so simple. The will of God is to believe in him who he sent, to believe in the Son, to understand and to believe that he will do the work in your life that he has set out to do if you will submit and you will let him and you will not be rebellious. And so we teach our kids the same as fathers, as mothers. Because this is the word and the will and desire of God, to move us from a temporary state to one where we can be with him and have fellowship with him forever, him and his Son. The desire of every father is to be with his kids. Will and I had a good little cry the other day. It was really unexpected, actually. Here I am tearing about now. I can't remember what brought it on, but I mentioned the fact that when kids grow up, they leave the house. I don't know what age, 17, 18, 19, 20, but that they leave the house, and before you know it, Will was in tears, and then I was in tears, and here I am again in tears. The desire of fathers is to have fellowship and keep fellowship with their kids. That's why there's a thing called empty nest syndrome, right? For moms, probably for dads. I think some dads like to play it tough. And, oh, I can't wait to get him out of the house. You know, get him off the payroll, or whatever. And that certainly has a place where they have to fly the nest to go pursue their own things and pursue their own life. But I think the desire of fathers and mothers is to have an eternal fellowship with their kids. And so it is with the Father with us. That is his desire. That is his work. That is his will. 1 John 2:17 says, "And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever." We want our kids to have that. God wants that for us as his kids. And so we work towards that end. We work towards that end. Not that we can work out the salvation, but we work towards bringing our kids to Jesus so that he can work out the salvation in our kids' lives. I've talked about a lot of the different things and aspects of the will of God for our kids. And I know there's a lot to I guess, digest here in terms of things we could grab onto. So I would just encourage, if you have children, or if you have grandchildren, if you have kids that you're influential in their sphere, even if you don't, maybe you have nephews, nieces, but even if you don't, maybe that you pray that God would lead you to one that you can have an effect on. And that we would pick maybe one of these things that is the will of God and choose to focus on that and implementing that in our kids' lives. I don't think there's anything more important than bringing them to Jesus. But there are certainly other things that we talked about leading up to that need to be done as well, that pertain to behaviors, pertain to abstinence, pertain to this, that, and the other thing that are all very important and all the will of God for us, and therefore the will of God for our kids. So in closing, I wanted to just read Hebrews 13, verse 21. It's a blessing, is a charge as we go forward from here. Back to the pleasure, back to the grind of raising kids. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's both, even at the exact same time. But we have our kids that we have influence on, again, whether parents or not. And so I implore you to make a change for the better in their lives, to bring these things to them as you're able. And now may the God of peace, who brought up our Lord Jesus from the dead, that great shepherd of the sheep, through the blood of the everlasting covenant, may he make you complete in every good work to do his will, working in you what is well-pleasing in his sight, through Christ Jesus, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. Let's worship him.